Okay, so this is the Daf for Friday, April 11th, 2025, Erev Shabbat, and this is being recorded on April 9th. This is early in the night. We had a siyum for Masechet Sanhedrin. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you to my wife for making a wonderful meal and putting up with doing a meal so close to Pesach, and thanks for everybody who came. You absolutely made my day to see you again. To make some new friends, and a couple guys have taken on that they're going to do Makkot, and we're going to have a bigger siyum on in 3 weeks. So, but aside from that, there was one thing I wanted to point out. So everything that I read, everything that I'm studying from, if you look in the description of the video, you'll find links, affiliate links to that particular book or versions of that book that you can pick up. So most people have missed that, and they've been asking me about various things like that. So Daf 3, Makkot. So the Gemara is puzzled by this. What is the meaning of the statement, the money remains in the possession of the owner? It means that they did not perform an action. It is identical to the reason of Rabbah, and it is not an additional explanation. The Gemara amends the formulation, the presentation of the statement. Say, and likewise, Rav Nachman says, know that it is so, as the money remains in the possession of the owner. Rav Nachman is not disagreeing with Rabbah. He merely formulates the statement differently. Apropos the statement of Rabbi Akiva in the Braita, Rav Yehuda says, oh, and that reminds me, it says here, apropos the statement of Rabbi Akiva in the Braita. So a lot of times when there's Braitot cited in the Gemara, it is referring to material that's in Tosefta. So I have a separate playlist for the Tosefta, and I have some recording already for the first parach. So if you want to check out that playlist, it's going up tonight. You can follow along with those Braitot that are recorded there, and some of the stuff will, mesh. But so apropos the statement of Rabbi Akiva in the Braita, Rav Yehuda says that Rav says a conspiring witness pays according to his share. The Gemara asks, what is the meaning of pays according to his share? If we say that it means that this witness pays half of the sum that the set conspired to render another liable to pay with their testimony, and that witness pays the other half, we already learned this in a Mishnah, 5a. When punishing conspiring witnesses, one divides the punishment of money among them, but one does not divide the punishment of lashes among them. Each receives the full 39 lashes. Rather, the Gemara explains that the expression pays according to a share means that in a case where only one of the set was rendered a conspiring witness, the halacha is that he pays his half of the sum. The Gemara asks, why does he pay at all in that case? But isn't it taught in a Braita, a conspiring witness pays money only when both were rendered conspiring witnesses? If only one was rendered a conspiring witness, he does not pay. Rava says, the statement is not referring to a case of conspiring witnesses. Rather, Rav's statement applies to the case of one who says, it was false testimony that I testified. The Gemara asked, is it in his power to have this statement accepted by the court? That runs counter to the principle. Once a witness stated his testimony, he may not then state a revision of that testimony. The Gemara answers, rather, Rav's statement applies to the case of one who says, we testified and were rendered conspiring witnesses in such and such a court. Since he was already convicted as a conspiring witness, it is as though he is admitting an obligation to give monetary restitution, and he is therefore liable to pay his share. The Gemara asks, in accordance with whose opinion is this halacha? It is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. Since it were in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, doesn't he say, a conspiring witness also does not pay based on his own admission? The Gemara answers, rather, Rav's statement applies to the case of one who says, we testified and were rendered conspiring witnesses in such and such a court, and were rendered liable to pay a specific sum of money. In that scenario, Rabbi Akiva would concede that one pays on the basis of his own admission. Once the court rendered him liable to pay a specific sum, his admission is not that he is liable to pay a fine, in which case he would be exempt. Once the court actually instructed them to pay, the debt has the status of any other monetary restitution, and one does not pay monetary restitution based on his own admission. The Gemara explains the novel element in Rav's statement. It might enter your mind to say that since he is unable to render his fellow witness liable to pay based on his admission, as only the testimony of two witnesses is capable of doing so, he too is not liable to pay based on that admission. To counter this, Rav teaches us that this admission that he owes money renders him liable to pay. Okay, back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, in the case of witnesses who said, we testify with regard to a man called so-and-so that he divorced his wife and did not give her payment of her marriage contract, and that they were rendered conspiring witnesses, the question arises with regard to the matter in which the sum of their payment is calculated. It is not possible to render witnesses liable to pay the entire sum of the marriage contract, as they can claim, but isn't it so that either today or tomorrow, that is, at some point in the future, he may divorce his wife or die, and ultimately he will be liable to give her the payment of her marriage contract? That being the case, the witnesses did not conspire to render him liable to pay a sum that he would otherwise not be liable to pay. The sum of their payment is calculated as follows. The court assesses how much money another person would be willing to give in order to purchase the rights to this woman's marriage contract, cognizant of the uncertainty that if she was widowed or divorced, the purchaser will receive payment of the marriage contract, but if she dies, her husband will inherit from her, and the one who purchased her marriage contract will receive nothing. Okay, back to the Gemara. The Gemara says, it opens, the Mishnah establishes that the payment of the conspiring witnesses is calculated based on the sum that one would be willing to pay for rights to payment of the marriage contract, taking into consideration the uncertainty whether he will ultimately receive that payment. The Gemara asks, how does the court assess that sum? Rav Chisda says, one calculates the sum in terms of the husband. How much would he be willing to pay for the husband's rights? How much would one be willing to pay for the husband's rights to the marriage contract based on the likelihood that his wife will die first and he will inherit from her? So Rav Natan bar Oshaya says, one calculates the sum in terms of the wife. So how much would one be willing to pay for the wife's rights to the marriage contract based on the likelihood that the husband will die first or divorce her? So Rav Papa says, one calculates the sum in terms of the wife, as Rav Natan bar Oshaya said, and the assessment is done in terms of the sum of her marriage contract. So one does not include in the calculation any, what is that word? Usufruct property that the wife brought with her into the marriage, the profits of which belong to the husband, despite the fact that as a result of the testimony of the conspiring witnesses, the husband would lose his rights to those profits. One calculates the sum only in terms of her marriage contract. So back to the Mishnah, and the Mishnah says, in the case of witnesses who said, we testify with regard to a man called so-and-so that he owes another person 1,000 dinars that he borrowed on the condition that he is to give the money back to him from now until 30 days have passed. And the borrower pays that he borrowed that sum, but it was on the condition that he is to give the money back to him from now until 10 years have passed. And they were rendered conspiring witnesses. Here, too, it is possible to render the witnesses liable to pay the entire sum. Rather, the court establishes how much money a person would be willing to give so that he would keep a loan of 1,000 dinars in his possession, and one calculates the difference between that sum in a situation where he would be required to give the money back from now until 30 days have passed. And that same sum is a situation where he would be required to give the money back from now until 10 years have passed. That difference is the sum that the testimony of the conspiring witnesses sought to have the borrower lose. Therefore, it is the sum that they must pay. The Gemara says now, Rav Yehuda says that Shmuel says, in the case of one who lends money to another for a period of 10 years, the sabbatical year abrogates the debt. See Deuteronomy 15, 1-11, and absolves the borrower of the obligation to repay it. Even though now, during the sabbatical year, we do not yet read concerning his loan the prohibition, quote, he shall not exact it of his neighbor and his brother because the Lord's release has been proclaimed. Deuteronomy 15, verse 2. As the time for the repayment has not yet arrived, ultimately, when the time for repayment arrives, he will come to a situation where the prohibition, quote, he shall not exact it, applies. Therefore, like all other debts, it is abrogated by the sabbatical year. Rav Kahana raised an objection from the Mishnah. Rather, the court establishes how much money a person would be willing to give so that he would keep a loan of 1,000 dinars in his possession. And one calculates the difference between that sum in a situation where he would be required to give the money back from now until 30 days have passed, and that same sum in a situation where he would be required to give the money back from now until 10 years have passed. And if you say that the sabbatical year abrogates a 10-year loan, the conspiring witnesses need to pay the borrower the entire sum of the loan as well, as their testimony sought to render the borrower liable to pay a debt that by right should be entirely forgiven. All right. The Gemara said, what are we dealing with here in our Mishnah? We are dealing with debts that are not abrogated with the passing of the sabbatical year. That is, in the case of one who lends money on the basis of collateral, or in the case of one who transfers his promissory notes to the court for collection. As we learned in a Mishnah, Shavuot 10:2, and in the cases of one who lends money on the basis of collateral and one who transfers his promissory notes to the court for collection, the sabbatical year does not abrogate those loans. In those cases, the debt would not have been forgiven during the sabbatical year. Therefore, the conspiring witnesses are not liable to pay the entire sum. There are those who state another version of this discussion. Rav Yehuda says that Shmuel says, in the case of one who lends money to another for a period of 10 years, the sabbatical year does not abrogate the debt. Even though when the time for repayment arrives, he will come to a situation where the prohibition, quote, he shall not exact it, applies. Now, in any event, during the sabbatical year, we do not yet read the prohibition of, quote, he shall not exact it concerning his loan. So Rav Kahana says, we learned this ruling in the Mishnah as well. The court establishes how much money a person would be willing to give so that a loan of 1,000 dinars will be in his possession, and one calculates the difference between that sum and a situation where he would be required to give the money back from now until 30 days have passed, and that sum in a situation where he would be required to give the money back from now until 10 years have passed. And if you say that the sabbatical year abrogates a 10-year loan, then the conspiring witnesses should pay the borrower the entire sum of the loan as well, and their testimony sought to render the borrower liable to pay a debt that by right should be entirely forgiven. The fact that they are not required to pay the entire sum proves that a 10-year loan is not abrogated by the sabbatical year. Rava said, no proof may be cited from there, as what are we dealing with here in our Mishnah? We are dealing with debts that are not abrogated with the passing of the sabbatical year. In the case of one who lends money on the basis of collateral, or in the case of one who transfers his promissory notes to the court for collection. As we learned in a Mishnah, Shavuot 10:2, in the case of one who lends money on the basis of collateral and one who transfers his promissory notes to the court for collection, the sabbatical year does not abrogate those loans. In those cases, the debt would not have been forgiven during the sabbatical year. Therefore, the conspiring witnesses are not liable to pay the entire sum. And Rav Yehuda says that Shmuel says, with regard to abrogation of debts, in the case of one who says to another, the stipulation, I am sending you money on the condition that the sabbatical year will not abrogate my debt, even if the borrower agrees to that stipulation. The sabbatical year abrogates the debt. The Gemara suggests, let us say that Shmuel holds that the lender who proposed that stipulation is one who stipulates counter to that which is written in the Torah. And in the case of anyone who stipulates counter to that which is written in the Torah, his stipulation is voided. The Gemara asks, but isn't it stated that there is a dispute between Rav and Shmuel concerning this matter? In the case of one who says to another, the stipulation, I am sending you this item on the condition that you have no claim of exploitation against me. If I charge you more than the item is worth, Rav says the buyer has claim of exploitation against him, as one cannot stipulate to waive the halacha of exploitation. And Shmuel says he has no claim of exploitation against him. Apparently, according to Shmuel, one may stipulate to waive a Torah law in monetary matters, as it is tantamount to waiving the rights of money due to him, and it is not in effect counter to that which is written in the Torah. The Gemara answers, wasn't it stated with regard to that halacha that Rav Anan said, it was explained to me personally by Shmuel himself that the matter depended on the formulation of the stipulation. If the seller stipulates on the condition that you have no claim of exploitation against me, then the buyer has no claim of exploitation against him, as it is as though he is waiving his right of money due him. But if the seller stipulates on the condition, that there is no prohibition of exploitation in this transaction, there is a prohibition of exploitation in that transaction. So Rav Anan continues, here too, if the lender stipulated to the borrower, I am lending you money on the condition that you will not abrogate the debt during the sabbatical year. The sabbatical year does not abrogate his debt, as the borrower is merely waiving money due him. But if he stipulated on the condition that the sabbatical year will not abrogate my debt, the sabbatical year abrogates the debt, as that is a stipulation to nullify the halacha of the sabbatical year concerning that loan. And one may not stipulate counter to that which is written in the Torah. Apropos of the loan discussed in the Mishnah, the Gemara cites a sage who taught, one who lends money to another for an unspecified period is not permitted to demand repayment from him less than 30 days after the loan took place. The Gemara comments, Rabbi Bar Bar Hana, who was seated before Rav, thought to say, this statement applies only with regard to a loan with a promissory note, as a person does not typically exert himself to write a promissory note for a loan whose duration is less than 30 days. But with regard to a loan by oral agreement, no, it may be for less than 30 days. Rav said to him, this is what my uncle, Rabbi Chia, said. This halacha applies to both one who lends with promissory note and one who lends by oral agreement. If one fails to establish a time for repayment of the loan, he may not demand repayment until 30 days have passed since the loan was given. The Gemara notes, that is also taught in Braita. One who lends money to another for an unspecified period is not permitted to demand repayment from him less than 30 days after the loan took place. And that is the case with regard to both one who lends with a promissory note and one who lends by oral agreement. The Gemara relates, Shmuel said to Rav Matana, you shall not sit on your feet until you have explained this halacha. Explain it immediately. For where is this matter that the sages stated derived? One who lends money to another for an unspecified period is not permitted to demand repayment from him less than 30 days after the loan took place, and that is the case with regard to both one who lends with promissory note and one who lends by oral agreement. Rav Matana said to him that it is derived from a verse, as it is written, the seventh year, the sabbatical year approaches, Deuteronomy 15, verse 9. The question arises from the fact that it is stated, the seventh year approaches. Don't I know that it is the sabbatical year? Rather, why must the verse state the sabbatical year? It is to tell you that there is another period that is like the sabbatical year. In which period is it? It is the period in the case of one who lends money to another for an unspecified period, who is not permitted to demand repayment from him less than 30 days after the loan took place. During that period, as during the sabbatical year, one may not exact payment for his loan. In what sense can that period be characterized as a year? It is as the master said, 30 days in a year are considered a year. And Rav Yehuda says, one who unwittingly opens a new neck opening in a shirt on Shabbat by cutting through the fabric and threads that kept it closed is liable to bring a sin offering. By creating the opening, he renders the shirt fit to wear, thereby fashioning a utensil on Shabbat. Rav Kahana objects to this. And what is the difference between this and the stopper of a wine barrel, which the sages permitted piercing on Shabbat in order to serve wine to guests? There too, by piercing the stopper, he fashions a utensil. Rava said to him, the cases are not comparable. In this case, that of the neck opening of a shirt, the material closing the neck hole is considered a connecting element. That is, it is an organic part of the weave of the fabric. And in that case, that of the stopper of the barrel, the stopper is not considered a connecting element, as its purpose is to be removed from the barrel. And Rav Yehuda says, that Rav says, in the case of 3 log of drawn water, into which 1/64th of a log, or quartove, of wine fell, the keller of the water is like the keller of wine, and that liquid fell into a ritual bath containing less than 40 seah. Although the sages ruled that 3 log of drawn water invalidate a ritual bath, in this case the liquid does not invalidate it, because the halakhic status of the liquid that fell into the ritual bath is that of wine, and wine does not invalidate a ritual bath. Rav Kahana objects to this. And what is the difference between this case of water, into which wine fell, and the case of dye water, as we learned in a Mishnah, Mikvaot 7.3? Rabbi Yoshi says, dye water in the amount of 3 log invalidates a ritual bath. Question. That's a question. The wine, like the dye, colors the water. Rava said to him, the difference is that there the mixture is called dye water, where the water maintains the status of water. Here it is called diluted wine. The Gemara asks with regard to Rav's statement, but didn't Rabbi Chia teach that 3 log of wine into which a quartove of wine fell reduced the ritual bath into a state where it is no longer valid? Rabbi said that this Braita is not difficult, as this statement of Rav is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, and that Braita taught by Rabbi Chia is in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis who disagree with Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. As we learned in the Mishnah, Mikvaot 7.5, in a case where there are 3 log of drawn water, and then that's the end of Daf 3. So thanks for studying with me. I'll try to get the lessons for Pesach up before Pesach, but if I don't, please forgive me. Okay, have a great day.